This is the Montana Outdoor Podcast, brought to you in part by Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, home of Boss Snowplows, CM Truck Beds, and Diamond Sea Trailers. Just go to rmtte.com for more information. And by Superior Hardwoods of Montana, home of the largest selection of in-stock high-end wood products and flooring in the western United States. Let them guide you through the woods at superior-hardwoods.com. Now, get ready for more fascinating topics and the most interesting people you will ever find in Montana's great outdoors. We offer new podcasts most every Saturday. You can get a link to these podcasts by going to our website, montanooutdoor.com, or by going to our Facebook page, or just send an email to downrigger@montanooutdoor.com and say send a link to my email. It's that simple. Now let's head out with your host, Downrigger Dale, and see what's going on in Montana's great outdoors.
Thank you very much, Manny. And as Manny just said, I am Downrigger Dale with the Montana Outdoor Podcast. I want to thank all of you for joining us. And as you, so many of you do, we've gotten so many podcast listeners from, well, all over Montana, but really now all over the world. This podcast is really growing, and I want to thank all of you for that. One thing before we get to my next guest is be sure and look at the podcast description in this podcast, and you'll see down below there's a bunch of links, and these will be links to all kinds of different information that we talk about on the podcast. So that way you're not having to feverishly try to write down any kind of websites and stuff like that. It'll all be down there below for you. Of course, you can always email me at downrigger@montanooutdoor.com. I'm always happy to hear from you, and let me know if there's any other topics you'd like to do. But right now, I want to talk about upland game birds in Montana. Upland game bird hunting in Montana is very popular. You heard me recently talk about pheasant hunting in the great state of Montana, but now I want to talk about upland game birds in general all across our great state. And Ken Plord is with me. He's a upland game bird specialist, and he is with the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Ken, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me on, Dale.
You bet. Now, let's get started. I hear your bird dog in the background there.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. They heard my chair twitch. They'll simmer down in a second. But
not a worry. That we're used to it here. We love to hear those doggies going. So Ken, let's talk first about yourself. Give us a little background on and who you are and how long you've been with the FWP and all that good stuff.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm born and raised in the East Coast, but I moved to Montana when I was 18 to go to school in Missoula at University of Montana and pursue a wildlife biology degree. So I did that, graduated in 2013. I hopped around a little bit seasonally, including some seasonal jobs with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks out here in Region 6 in Northeast Montana. And after a few seasons of that, they hired me full-time as an upland game bird habitat specialist. So that's what I still do today, 9 or 10 years later. I do a lot of habitat work specifically for upland game birds, habitat and access. So working with a lot of the local landowners to provide habitat and access to hunters.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to cover a lot of those things. From your perspective, Ken, what would you say is the most popular game bird in Montana right now as far as hunting hours, those kind of things?
Yeah, so as far as hunting goes, pheasant's still kind of on top of the pile in terms of upland game bird hunting in the state. I do think steadily some of the native grouse species, especially sharp-tailed grouse, are starting to catch up. At least in our neck of the woods, I'm seeing annually more and more folks pursue those. If you looked at all the different grouse species combined, which we've got 5 or so in the state, those are pretty popular, but pheasant's still number one when you look at just a single species.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the pheasant is, as I was talking with Hunter from Montana Pheasants Forever, and we were going through that, he was saying that the pheasants are still the top bird out there. But tell us a bit about how in general, how upland game birds are doing across the state of Montana. How are our population numbers looking? Is there any one species that is struggling a bit or doing better than the others?
So yeah, I can certainly cover the gamut. And I'll talk probably more for some of the eastern Montana birds,
Sure.
the prairie birds, pheasant, sharptails, huns, and sage grouse. The western part of the state, the forest grouse, we don't necessarily track populations as closely, although they're often influenced by some of the same factors. The big ones really just being kind of habitat and weather. And the weather year to year drives pretty much most game bird production. And what we see, the two pieces that are key and have kind of driven populations of all our species are kind of winter conditions, and then summer rain, especially spring rain and temperatures during the nesting and brood rearing seasons. The big thing that's affected populations kind of statewide of all species the last 2 or 3 years, or really 4 or 5 years if you look at it, is drought. I'm sure most folks are quite familiar with the fact that a fair bit of the state was in drought really for the last 2 years. So that's kind of impacted populations kind of across the board. Many spots did have a bit of a tougher winter last year as well. But the drought has kind of been the driving role, especially in eastern Montana, limiting the good nesting habitat and, the availability of habitat and bugs for chicks early in their life cycle. That being said, this spring, it seemed like most of the state had pretty good moisture, pretty good temperatures during kind of that key May, June timeframe. So many spots were kind of struggling in terms of bird numbers coming into the year. It seems like most folks in most places probably saw some improvement in numbers, but it really varies from place to place, region to region. Some places might be looking better than last year, but are still kind of below their long-term averages. We've got other spots that are, above long-term average. They're looking great. Hunters are having a lot of good success. So it's kind of a mix, and it definitely depends on the kind of specific spot or county and how much drought has impacted that in the last couple years. So it's kind of hard to answer it as a broad scale because it really runs the gamut. But
Sure.
I'd say almost everything improved this year, but definitely many places came into this year in not the greatest shape. Most of our game birds overall, though, are doing pretty well, in the broad sense. Even the ones that are down, that's no surprise. I think the one most folks know of that's maybe a little worse off is sage grouse. That's a species we've kept an eye on for quite a while now due to their kind of flirting with the Endangered Species Act and the risk of them getting listed. Montana's done a lot to try to keep them off that list, and generally they're doing well. Our spring counts for that species did drop by a little bit compared to the previous year, but really not very much given the fact that, again, we had pretty significant drought across much of their breeding range in the state. And we also had some real difficult survey conditions with those, late winter we had lasting well into April. Just sometimes the ability to get out and survey is impacted by things like that, which can still influence some of those population models and estimates. But
sure.
Overall things, it didn't seem like it was too bad of a year for game birds. Certainly most of the regions and other folks I've talked to, it seemed like coming into this fall hunting season, things are at least in decent shape, or probably improving over the last year or two.
With the sage grouse, with it, like you say, kind of flirting that endangered species classification, what is it that's been really driving that? Is it mainly the drought that's affecting sage grouse, or is it more of a habitat thing with them?
So sage grouse, it's more of a habitat thing, and it's really at a broader scale. Montana's sage grouse are actually doing relatively well when you look at our populations and their fluctuations compared with some other areas. When they talk about listing the whole species, some of the major threats are actually more what you see in the Great Basin. There's a real vicious cycle of fire and cheatgrass taking over a lot of habitat there. So that's one of the major issues, which we really don't see as much in Montana. Other places, it's just habitat loss and fragmentation, energy development in some places. Sometimes it's lost to agriculture. cropland, sagebrush getting converted to cropland, but we don't see too much of that as lately or recently. So again, it seems like really the last 10 or so years, at least, Montana's populations, within the fluctuations we see annually due to drought and weather, have been doing relatively well compared to other places. But yeah, again, some of those other places in the country and the West where sage grouse roam, those are where some of the more nasty issues are arising and really driving some of those endangered species type conversations. So I'd say relative to other places, Montana's sage grouse actually are in pretty good shape.
Great. How about as far as in Montana, we're seeing kind of an influx of population coming in. I think COVID kind of drove some of that. Some of it is just, crime rate and other things where people have looked at Montana and said, that's a dang good looking place to live. How has that affected the upland game birds in Montana, especially as it relates to, we're seeing more land being bought up from out of state as far as relating to access? How is that affecting? Is it affecting upland game birds much at all in Montana?
Probably to some degree. I think the greatest effect we're seeing, both, maybe not just from influx of permanent residents, but certainly just hunting visitors, is at least in certain parts of the state. We've definitely seen quite an increase in hunting pressure for game birds. And again, I mentioned some of it's starting to be earlier in the season, with sharp-tailed grouse and Hungarian partridge hunting. I'm seeing a lot more of that than we used to see 5 or 10 years ago. And that's both from residents and non-residents alike. So what we're seeing is, a lot more hunting pressure in spots, which sometimes does influence access. Landowners may have less pleasant experiences with more and more folks around for a longer period of time. So I think there's some influence from that. In terms of just straight population growth, some spots are probably losing a little bit of access or habitat, but that's probably not affecting our game birds at a statewide scale by any means. But certainly around some of the larger towns and cities, you do hear reports of certainly habitat and access being lost and just it becoming harder and harder to find a place to hunt, especially in those lower valley bottoms to hunt things like partridge and pheasant, that are certainly more restricted in their ranges to private lands in the state than things like mountain grouse.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the things that the FWP is doing? Access onto private lands is a big issue for a lot of our listeners, both on the Montana Outdoor podcast that we're on right now, but also the Montana Outdoor radio show. For the last 25 years, we've been broadcasting all across the state. And that continues to be one of the biggest things that a lot of my emails come in is, hey, find out how we can get more access to private lands. And that's always a kind of a give and take deal. What are some of the things you guys are doing at FWP to help increase some of that access to private land?
Yeah, certainly. As most folks know, our flagship access program is the block management program. Mm-hmm. Every year, staff in every region, both the access staff and really many of our enforcement and wildlife staff as well, spend a lot of time talking to landowners, trying to either keep them in block management and find new enrollees. I know in the last year or so with the legislature that we've had some shifts in some of the funding caps. So there is always, we're recently trying to raise some of the caps and rates. So block management landowners do get paid a little bit better. That does help. But a lot of it's just face-to-face time with different landowners that, Fish, Wildlife and Park staff spend, explaining the programs, telling them how things will work, trying to make sure those folks that are in our programs have good experiences with hunters on their properties. We have a number of other, access programs as well. The public access land agreements, PALA, trying to open up lands that are public lands but are blocked with access through private. So that program has had some success in some of the regions. The program I spent a lot of time working on, myself and a couple colleagues in other regions, is the Upland Gamebird Enhancement Program. We do both habitat and access. So habitat work that's tied to access, including many walk-in areas, especially in kind of north central and eastern Montana. We have a lot of walk-in areas on, especially things like CRP fields, but also doing things like shelter belts and food plots, grass cover plantings, things like that. So Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has, a good handful of different private land and public land access programs that we're always chipping away on. As you mentioned, sometimes the more pressure, both from the influx of new residents and just out-of-state hunters and just hunting in general, can sometimes complicate those conversations. But we're certainly trying pretty much every day of the year.
Yeah.
In most places, I think we're doing all right. But yeah, certainly as, again, some of these urban centers expand, some of those areas, and trying to find good access close to those is certainly a challenge. And that's probably going to remain a challenge for a while.
What would you say are some of the barriers to entry for landowners to want to, open up their lands? What are some of the bigger complaints that you're getting from landowners to say, yeah, see, that's why I don't want to open up my land to hunters?
Yeah, it's, probably a variety of factors. A lot of folks have already been enrolled for a long time, and those folks, sometimes the reasons they're dropping out, what we see more than anything is generational changes. Younger members of the family taking over. Often they like to hunt themselves, and this is probably the same thing with folks that don't want to roll, is it's folks that do like to do their own hunting. You see some of that. Some just don't want the pressure of extra folks on their land. Again, with more and more people lately, it's just a bother whether folks are leaving gates open or littering, or just the general hassle of other folks being around when, most of our landowners are agricultural producers, going about their business. So having a bunch of people in your way, when you're trying to do your thing, I think that's something some folks like to avoid. The reasons, though, definitely vary. I've, heard a whole bunch. It really depends on the individual. But yeah, those are some of the common ones. Whether trying to keep it to themselves, just don't want the bother, are probably two of the bigger ones. And then, as you kind of alluded to before, there is certainly an increase in the state of folks buying land for outdoor recreation. And then, there is some more and more private land type leasing going on where, there is some access, but it's to a pretty small number of folks, sometimes for a fee or just a few individuals, things like that.
Yeah.
So there's a whole smattering of reasons why it's challenging to gain access in many places.
Well, and I think that's something FWP has really tried to focus on. I know that one of the programs, and I'm going to be doing some podcasts specifically on the It's Up to Us program, and talking about, if we want more access to private land, a lot of it is just up to the hunter of how we are going to how we approach landowners and that. Do you see that? And I know that FWP's kind of just got that It's Up to Us program, really going, but do you think that's going to have a good effect? I think it's a key deal that, and I like the way the FWP has approached that. If you want more access, a lot of it is up to you. There's good ways and bad ways to approach landowners.
Nope, definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's certainly individual behavior. And if everyone was, being responsible and courteous, I think it would make a huge difference. Most of the things we get, especially with landowners already enrolled, reasons they get frustrated is, again, little things like littering, parking really in inconsiderate spots, blocking things like access to a cow pasture or grain bins, parking on county roads in the middle of harvest when folks are trying to move, combines, things like that. Driving off roads is another thing we hear a lot about, at least in our neck of the woods, trying to get out closer to mirror where the habitat is, or just driving around scouting for game. So it's a lot of these little tiny things, that kind of make up good behavior. And that's, I think, what that whole It's Up to Us campaign's about. And it certainly, when I talk to landowners in the spring, renewing contracts, things like that, yep, if they've had a bad experience, it's usually just because of those little things. It's nothing and it's rarely is it something larger than that. So yeah, if, those kind of little changes can make a big difference, especially if more of us are doing them.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna, like I say, I'll do some more podcasts on that area, and hopefully we can get some awareness going there. We're going to take a quick break here, Ken, and when we come back, I want you to talk a bit about maybe some of those little niche areas around Montana that a lot of upland game bird hunters don't think about. That could be some good areas that you might want to consider re-exploring or exploring all new together. So when we come back, we'll talk more about that right after this. I know our regular listeners to this podcast have heard me talk about Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer, but for those of you that are new here, let me start with the basics about Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. They are your locally owned Boss Snowplow, CM Truck Bed, and Diamond C Trailer dealer. They offer a wide variety of auto, truck, and trailer accessories and specialize in sales and service of trailers. Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer is conveniently located at 5680 Expressway in Missoula, Montana. Now, let's get into the stuff that truly makes them special and why they are the ones we recommend if you ever need a new trailer, a snowplow, or just need service and or advice. Let me give you an example. They carry the best snowplows on the planet. That's Boss Snowplows. So that way, when you get sick of just getting by with what you have or sick of spending a fortune to have someone else plow you out, you can come tell the folks at Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer about what and where you need to remove snow, and they will help you find the perfect Boss snowplow to get the job done right now and likely for the rest of your life. I'm going to tell you something about these Boss snowplows that just amazes me, but I truly hear about it all the time once someone I know buys one. They always say something to the effect of, "You know, Rigger, I never thought I'd say this, and I know it sounds crazy, but I actually have fun plowing snow with my Boss snowplow. And crazier yet, I like it so much I actually look for places near me that need plowing and ask property owners if I can plow it for them." Gang, I'm not exaggerating. That is the Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer difference. They carry the equipment that not only is perfect for you, it actually becomes part of you. So, gang, don't end up hoping you get the right snowplow, trailer, or truck bed. Just go to rmtte.com. Look at what they have, then call them at 406-549-4243. Get all your questions answered, and then go have fun this winter. Thanks to Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. Go see them, rmtte.com. That's Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. And we are here with Ken Plord. We're talking a bit about upland game birds. And, you know, we talked a lot about access and that, but let's get into some of those little niche areas across Montana. And I imagine there are, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that maybe you're not seeing a lot of pressure in that are really, you know, good areas for upland game birds that people just may not be thinking about. Are there some of those out there that you can think of?
It's hard to speak to it at a statewide scale, you know, knowing I live and work in one corner of the state,
sure,
so
that's
I see
fine,
mine more than others. Mm-hmm. That being said, at least I think what I've seen the last couple of years is a big shift from both residents and non-residents traveling to places that, yeah, maybe weren't as affected by drought in the last year. Maybe they show some higher bird numbers with our spring surveys, things like that. So in a lot of areas, some of those kind of quiet niches are just the places that maybe have looked worse on the maps or look worse in bird reports. But there is a lot less pressure in those. And like I mentioned, the weather this spring did improve numbers. So going to some of those places that might not look as good on the face, but taking the time to find the really good habitats in, you know, really small areas, often kind of no matter how bad our populations are doing, there's always good little spots. You know, they might be hidden gems, might be a long walk from the road, but there's those kind of in every spot every year. So taking the time to find those tiny little spots that are hard to find, no matter where you are, but especially the areas where less other folks might be, because it sounds like it might be harder to find birds. Those kind of sometimes can be the hidden gems. I know I've heard more than a few folks, locals and other folks alike, waiting for even worse bird years because it chases everyone else away. And if you still got a few secret little spots, you know where to find them. It can be pretty good. I don't think most subscribe to that theory, but just trying to be where everyone else isn't, which sometimes is just where it looks bad on the drought map or in the population report, is kind of a hidden gem sometimes.
Yeah, and you're in Region 6, right? So, where in Region 6, are there any little places you like to cherry pick to find your favorite upland game bird?
I can't say there's anywhere specific. Certainly, the last few years we've seen a lot of pressure in the eastern half of the region, just because the numbers have looked better there. But again, with some improving conditions, some of the western parts of the region are getting a lot less pressure, but there are some areas to go that are still pretty good. I think there's, again, more and more areas in a year like this that are going to start to become better, that if you go put some boot leather on, you'll find some pretty good spots without as a lot of company, which, certainly the eastern half of the region, we've seen plenty of other folks. I mean, the birds are there, but you'll see some other hunters too. So I think that holds true in some of the other regions as well. Some of the spots that might not have looked as good the last year or two are actually starting to become the places to look now, because you'll kind of be alone, but the birds are there to be found.
Sure. So those are things for you hunters out there to take a look at. Now, as we talked early in this podcast, we were talking about, how popular the pheasant is, and a lot of hunters focus on that. Is there a species across the state or in your area, wherever you want to give example of maybe one that's a little misunderstood that people might want to think about going out and giving it a try?
Certainly my favorite's the sharp-tailed grouse. It's our most populous native grouse species in the state, and certainly at least the most targeted by other hunters. So it's not really a true secret. And like I said, I think it is becoming more popular for bird hunters to chase. We are seeing, the numbers of hunters pursuing them every year start to increase. I think they're often misaligned maybe for their table fare, but I definitely disagree with that. They're one of my favorite birds to eat
I was
as well.
just going to say, I grew up eating grouse quite a bit, in western Montana. That sharp-tailed grouse is actually pretty good eating, don't you think?
It's great. I love it. It's kind of the perfect go-between like, a white meat and dark meat. There's certainly a darker meat, but it's got a little bit of flavor. If folks are scared of stronger flavors, it's pretty easy to throw a decent little sauce on there. But often just a simple grilled grouse breast is pretty hard to beat.
That's the way I used to prepare it, was just grilling it. But
yep, definitely, it's hard to beat that. And I love to throw them in an Alfredo.
Oh yeah.
Some folks like steak Alfredo. Some like chicken Alfredo. Grouse Alfredo is kind of right in between. It's kind of a personal favorite of mine. But I've had them many different ways, and I haven't found a way I don't like to eat them. I think often meat care and taking care of your birds in the field is important. Not letting them sit in the sun when it's kind of warm in the late season, getting them in the cooler and things like that. I think that's an important part for some of those grouse species. That's might be why some folks have had bad experiences, is, the birds weren't taken care of quick. The meat care might have suffered, and then they might taste kind of funky. But if you kind of keep that in the back of your mind while you're going about harvesting animals, it can make a pretty big difference come time to put them on the dinner table.
So when folks want to give the sharp-tailed grouse hunting a try, what are some areas they should look for that would be good key habitat to find a sharp-tailed grouse?
Yeah, definitely. So, one of the fun things about chasing sharptails is they're a native game bird. So some of the best places to look for them are some of our native prairies. So there is a lot of public land in the state, and then certainly a lot of private lands on block management, that some of those larger ranches, things like that. For sharptails, really, they cover most eastern Montana. You're generally looking for the places that's more prairie. They are around, but a little less numerous in things like the thick sagebrush rangelands. But so looking for kind of those mixed grass prairies. They tend to like grass that's knee height or less. They don't like it real tall. They do like a little thick on the ground. Lots of diversity. So if you're walking around seeing a bunch of different flowers or different grasses, berries, things like that, that's a good sign you're kind of in sharp-tailed country. Then another key feature for them generally is some sort of brushy cover. Doesn't need to be a lot of it, but having some sort of like brushy draw, like choke cherries, buffalo berries, hawthorns, things like that nearby is also good. You can certainly find them in parts of the state that are mixed in with agriculture, where you have those rangelands and draws butt up against a crop field. They'll certainly hang out in those kind of where those edges and use both habitats. But just the same, you can find them way out in some of those big prairie pastures of, BLM or state trust lands. Don't be afraid to get way out there and just kind of explore those native habitats, and you'll probably find some sharptails. But especially if the grass cover is decent and there's a little bit of brush nearby, you're probably close to sharptails nearby.
Mm-hmm. And do you typically use your dogs going after the sharptails?
Yep, I certainly do, and that's probably the most popular way to pursue them is with pointing dogs or occasionally flushing dogs. Since it is big prairie country, some big running dogs is kind of the classic. But even with folks that don't have dogs to hunt with, you can certainly find sharptails. If that's the case, I definitely would focus on things like brushy draws or kind of field edges where rangelands meet up with crop fields. Those kind of things that can kind of concentrate birds a little bit. Certainly, if you do have a dog, it's a little easier to cover some of those bigger grass pastures. They'll go out there and find them for you, but they're definitely huntable either way.
Mm-hmm. And for let's say you have a dog, you're a avid pheasant hunter. Is there much of a learning curve at all for dogs to go after the sharptails?
The only thing I'd say is sometimes sharptails can be a little more sensitive to pressure. They learn pretty quick. One of the reasons I think sharptails are becoming more popular is that, we start September 1st as an earlier season for them.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to get on some of the younger birds that are less wise. But those birds figure out the game pretty quick. Especially for pointing dogs, they have to learn pretty quick. They can't pressure sharptails, because they live in a little shorter cover. They'll generally see something coming. So dogs have to learn to kind of point things further away, or you might just be watching them fly off in the distance. So that might be the biggest difference for, folks with dogs. Otherwise, it's not too different. As long as you're in the right country, you'll probably find some birds.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you've got a good idea there, and for those of you that have never tried grouse hunting, I really encourage you to give it a try. I think you'll have a lot of fun, and it just becomes another thing that you can get after. And like you say, you got a little earlier start with it, and that. I know I've talked about pheasants with the Pheasants Forever people, but one area we really didn't get into because it's, Pheasants Forever is more of a habitat deal, and that is the pheasant stalking. And I was hoping maybe you could address some of that. It's been interesting, the comments that I have seen from hunters. Some of them really like the idea of stalking pheasants and getting them, more out there to help youngsters maybe have a little more luck and get into upland game bird hunting. What are some of the things you've heard both pro and con on that? Because, like one of the things I noticed was the prison has been raising pheasants for the FWP, so you can go out, and some people have been kind of urging to get rid of that program. What are your thoughts on the prison side of it, of raising the pheasants for stalking?
So I could certainly touch on the pros and cons. I'll leave out any personal opinions, but
Okay.
yes, it definitely runs the gamut. Some folks, especially folks with less access to pheasants, again, there's certain parts of the state where it is hard to find them or find access to them. So this is a kind of thing you see, certainly in our state, but also in many other states, for those same reasons where it's hard to gain access. Often there's stock bird programs. So folks that live in kind of bigger areas do have an area to hunt pheasants that are closer to them. There's a recruitment argument for it as well. Yep. Having, especially younger kids often in those same areas have a better chance to, contact birds and harvesting them, and have that success maybe play a role in their future enjoyment of hunting. On the flip side, you hear a lot of folks, especially depends on the part of the state they're in, but they acknowledge the fact there's already a lot of wild pheasants in a lot of places in our state with good access to them. So many times folks don't feel it's maybe necessary to drive birds out and drop them off in those areas where there's really already plenty of wild pheasants to be found. That's the strongest argument. There's also some kind of ethics and sportsmanship arguments that are kind of made on that, against side as well. But yeah, I think a lot of it's just folks, acknowledging that in many places we've already got pretty good bird hunting in the state. So they don't feel like there's a need for that. They would like to see that money used elsewhere. So those are kind of the two sides you hear from it. And there's, certainly many folks in both camps.
Right. And if you do harvest a pheasant that was raised, in the prison, they do ask that you return the little orange jumpsuits that they have to wear. That's one of my favorite little pheasant humor there, but
that's a good one.
So we're going to take another quick break here. And when we come back, I want to talk a bit about, where the future of upland game bird hunting is going in Montana, and if there's any kind of future plans that you see coming down the line for the FWP and in enhancing game birds. So we'll come back to that in just a few. I want to talk a bit about a very special company located in western Montana, Superior Hardwoods of Montana. They were established in 1977, and since that time, guiding customers through the woods has been their passion throughout their history. The main focus at Superior Hardwoods of Montana has been to provide the finest wide plank flooring and unique building materials available anywhere. One of the things I noticed right away about the owner of Superior Hardwoods of Montana, John Medliger, and his son Corey, and the rest of the staff there is they're very proud to offer the largest selection of in-stock flooring in the western United States. See, for over 40 years, they've been known for leading the industry in reclaimed and antique building materials, and the success that followed has allowed them to, now get this, stock over 11 acres of stunning architectural lumber that awaits the perfect addition to your home. One thing I want you to remember is just because they're located in Missoula, Montana, that does not mean they can't help you turn your home into a piece of historical art if you live somewhere else. They have been guiding folks from as far away as Hawaii and beyond through the woods for many years. So no matter if your project is located across the street from them, across the state, or somewhere else in the world, they can't wait to turn your house into a dream home. Their goal is simple. They stand ready to deliver the best choices with reliability and honesty, helping at any phase of a project with inspirational advice. And I'm not exaggerating when I say they actually treat their customers as friends and family. So the choice is yours. But if I were you, I would go to superior-hardwoods.com. superior-hardwoods.com. Of course, you're more than welcome to call them, 406-235-7452, or, they'd love you to visit 5120 Highway 93, just south of Missoula, Montana. They can't wait to guide you through the woods at Superior Hardwoods of Montana. Go see them. You're going to love what they do to your home. And we are back here on the Montana Outdoor Podcast. I'm with Ken Plord. We're talking about upland game birds across the state of Montana, as well as in where Ken's located in Region 6. How do you see the future going for the upland game bird populations and just the role that FWP is playing in that? Is it going to be more of kind of business as usual, or are there some new programs that you guys are trying to work on to enhance upland game birds?
So I wouldn't say there's so much new programs. It's just we're continually focused on the ones we've got. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm with our Gamebird habitat program, so we're always doing a lot on that front, trying to make sure there's habitat for Gamebirds, both with individual landowner level habitat projects, but also working with our partners, at Pheasants Forever, NRCS, Farm Service Agency, things like that, to make sure there's kind of large scale habitat programs going on in the state. Things like the Conservation Reserve Program. We're always providing kind of input and technical advice on the technical committees on things like that. So we kind of work on Gamebird habitat on multiple different angles. In some spots in the state, we're working with, the Forest Service, federal partners to work on forest management on some areas. So trying to do as much as we can with the programs we have and the dollars we have for Gamebirds. That being said, generally, like I mentioned before, Gamebirds as a whole are doing relatively well in the state. There's always those ups and downs with weather and again, slowly with habitat change, but generally it's not looking like something's going to be drastically different, in the next 5 or 10 years on that front. Mm-hmm. So we don't have any major plans to kind of change Gamebird management or habitat work by any means. Just kind of keep chipping away at what we've been doing for the last few decades, really.
So no major changes in limits or rules and regs that you foresee coming up in the near future?
We've not had any conversations for things like that. And, it's not something that seems likely. Generally we manage Gamebirds pretty conservatively. I know some folks in some spots think harvest is a lot, but generally Gamebirds are the way they reproduce, they can reproduce a lot in a very short period of time. So, and a lot of them do succumb to, weather and predators annually. So they're designed to kind of produce high populations annually. So with the limits we have are pretty low. So even in areas that get quite a lot of hunting pressure, the population impact's actually still pretty minor. It's pretty difficult to actually overhunt Gamebirds in a lot of areas, especially the more prolific ones like our grouse species, pheasants and huns. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm sure we'll probably continue to have sage grouse be a more restrictive season, at a lower bag limit. And you don't see a huge harvest pressure for that. It seems like a lot of folks chase them more for the novelty or the enjoyment of the terrain and the different species. So as long as that doesn't change, I suspect, things like seasons and bag limits will probably stay pretty similar for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's some good news. I think we all like to know that, things are, I think one of the things that gets in the way a lot of times with hunters is nobody likes change. Mm-hmm. And so that's a good sign. How about as far as things that cooperation with other agencies? Is the federal side of it, are you getting good cooperation there? Are there things that our listeners could do to maybe contact their federal representatives to help in that area? Or do you guys have a pretty good relationship going so far?
So certainly, agency to agency, I think partner to partner, generally we have great relationships. A lot of it's just our local staff working with their local staff in the federal offices. And I think that generally is pretty good across the state. The big thing that impacts Gamebird populations, especially in like the eastern 2/3 of Montana, the federal farm bill and the Conservation Reserve Program and some of the other conservation programs that are associated with that is always a big thing. The folks that are kind of paying attention to policy know that the farm bill is up for renewal right now. We're still waiting on Congress to kind of work on that. So that, and whether they'll maintain or increase or decrease the CRP program is always a big driver. So those kind of national level policy decisions is sometimes things that affect, Gamebirds here at a broad scale at the federal level, a lot more than just relationships with our, individual agency partners and offices. So those are the kind of things we kind of keep an eye on, but it's hard to say if there's much anyone can do. You can certainly contact your, state legislators, though, if you want to comment about farm bill policies or making sure there's habitat programs in place.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the keys that that people should really keep in mind, especially when you hear, we always try to keep people informed as far as, okay, FWP would really like your comments on this or that, is make sure you do comment, because that does affect the way you guys are going to manage things and do things, is when you get feedback from hunters, right?
Yep, certainly. We always take, public comments into account. Often, even if it's just conversations before and after, before we try to implement or propose things. But yeah, certainly during public comment periods, those ideas are certainly all reviewed and valued. So yeah, folks should never hesitate to comment on anything they're interested in. It is all reviewed and thought about and looked at and considered.
Yeah, I can't stress that enough with people. Is, you think, oh, well, my comment's not going to make a difference. Well, yeah, it will. It really does. So in focusing on your area over in Region 6, if somebody said, I've never tried that region, I think I might want to give it a try, what's some advice you could give them as far as areas they could do? Because, often that's what keeps us from going to a new area, is you go, well, I don't know much about that area, and where do I go? How do I do? Maybe you can kind of give us some suggestions on ways to plan a hunt over in your area, and what you would recommend we go after.
Yeah, so I think for both our area and really some of the other parts of the state as well, when you're looking for game birds, or the things I always recommend to hunters just starting out, is to grab some of our access guides, both the block management and the Upland Gamebird. Again, we have an Upland Gamebird program specifically. That's a separate access guide. So there's additional opportunities through that program. Both of those programs are also viewable on our website, on our interactive hunt planner map. That can be a really handy tool when you're going to an area, because you can turn all those access programs on, and just kind of start surfing around, look for areas that, there's some access available. You can turn on things like aerial imagery and see what kind of rough habitats are available, whether it looks like it's, big ranches or a mix of ag, cropland agriculture and things. Might be a bunch of sagebrush. So kind of understanding those habitats roughly is a good first step, and the access available. In many places, certainly in Region 6, you could set up in just about any town, and there's probably a slew of bird hunting opportunities available. But, the percentage of one pop species over another might vary a little bit based on those habitats. Like in our region, for example, we have pheasants kind of on the eastern, third of the region, and then kind of along the riparian habitats throughout kind of the middle and center of our region, anywhere there's more kind of those big riparian areas like the Milk River and Missouri River valleys, things like that, or agriculture. Or if you want to go to chase something like sage grouse, the middle of our region, those, Phillips and Valley counties especially have a lot of core sagebrush habitats. So those are the kind of things you'd focus on. Elsewhere in our regions, we've got big tracts of prairie, and that, again, those are good places to start looking for sharp-tailed grouse. There's many towns in Region 6 that have pretty good access between public lands and block management. So starting out with that hunt planner or just both of those access guides is really the great first step to kind of get a sense of what's available where. You can kind of pick where you want to start and base it on what's there.
What's your favorite bird to hunt in your area?
As I mentioned before, I really like sharp-tailed grouse. I like chasing those native grouse, and they're my favorite up here. They said they can get wily as the season goes on, but that just adds to the challenge. And I hear a lot of folks think that they can't hunt them once October rolls around, or even November. And while they are a little wiser at times, you can still have pretty good opportunities to chase them really throughout the rest of the fall. Sometimes it becomes a little harder to get into some of those spots once the snow flies and gets deep. But I enjoy chasing sharptails as much of the season as I can.
Is there one thing in particular that, if I filled a room full of upland game bird hunters and you had a chance to ask them one question, what's one of the main things you'd like to hear from upland game bird hunters?
That's a That's an interesting question. Usually they're the ones asking questions to me, so it's hard to know what I want to know from
Yeah.
a room full of them.
Well, let's start.
Yeah.
We can start there. What's the most asked question you get from hunters?
Well, certainly it's just how are the birds doing this year? What areas have better bird numbers? That's what I hear a lot. I'd say sometimes for me, later in the season, I guess the question I like to hear back is those folks I've talked to before is how did you do? We always put out forecasts and guesses based on our population surveys and what we see in the field. But knowing how folks do after the fact, what they saw, what the habitat was like is always a helpful feedback. Including most folks are familiar with their telephone harvest surveys. They get those calls every year. So it's, making sure you get good answers to those and taking those phone calls, because having that information is helpful to understand how our populations are doing and how folks had success or lack of success. I guess I get asked how birds are doing a lot, but it's just as helpful to hear back from folks later on how they actually saw it in the field.
So what's the secret spot you can share with us? We won't tell anybody else. What's that secret spot in your area that everyone should go to?
Oh, the secret spot's always in North Dakota. Just one state away.
Just right over that next hill. That's
just
the
over
spot.
That next hill, exactly. Yeah. No, there's no secrets. I think sometimes the only secret is boot leather, and again, it doesn't hurt to have a bird dog. But walk enough miles in the right spots, or if you walk enough miles, you'll find the right spots. Is kind of how bird hunting goes. So
not too many shortcuts around it, is there?
No, but that's part of the enjoyment for a lot of folks is just getting out there, seeing the country at a nice time of year. And if you get a few birds in the bag, all the better.
Well, Ken, I want to thank you so much for your time and spending time with us and all that. Is there anything else you want to share with folks, or any kind of news or things you'd want to get out before we go?
Not too much that I can think of off the top of my head. Like you said, you mentioned earlier the kind of the ethics campaign. That's definitely something for folks to pay attention to as they're getting in the field more and more this fall. Just keep in mind to be kind of courteous. Hunters, especially when you're on private lands, thank your landowners when you see them. Other than that, nope, just have folks have a safe and fun hunting season.
Yeah, there's some great upland game bird opportunities out there. And I think one of the reasons that we're fortunate that there are all those great opportunities is the hard work that you and so many other folks with the FWP are doing. And you probably don't get too many pats on the back, but you should. So thanks for all your hard work and what you do. No
problem. Well, thanks for you, Dale. We appreciate that.
Yeah, you be sure and come on anytime you've got news or things like that. Feel free to get a hold of us. We'd love to chat with you some more. Until then, we hope to see you out there as we're chasing those birds around.
Sounds great. I'll see you out there in the field.
All right. That's Ken Plord. He's with Montana FWP and doing a great job for us there in Region 6, and good information really from across the state. If you have some questions for Ken, we'll put a link to his contact info, and you folks can certainly ask him any questions. It's all there in the podcast description, and I'll also get some links on some of those hunt planner things and that we talked about. So just go back to the podcast description, those of you that are listening right now, and just go down, and there's some good links there that you can go and start your next adventure chasing the birds around the great state of Montana. Until then, everyone be safe and have fun out there in Montana's great outdoors.
Thanks for listening to the Montana Outdoor Podcast. It has been brought to you in part by Superior Hardwoods of Montana, home of the largest selection of in-stock high-end wood products and flooring in the western United States. Let them guide you through the woods at superior-hardwoods.com. And by Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, home of Boss Snowplows, CM Truck Beds, and Diamond Sea Trailers. Just go to rmtte.com for more information. So what did you think of today's podcast? Send your questions and comments to Downrigger at montanooutdoor.com. We should be dropping a new podcast this next Saturday. Until then, we will see you soon out in Montana's great outdoors.